It's baffled scholars for 2 millennia. It is a puzzle made of multi-dimensional elements, an enigma with roots that reach back to the dawning of time, perhaps before. Daniel explained part of it. Ezekiel and Isaiah had glimpses into it. John saw it all for the time of the end. That time is now. Join Derek and Sharon Gilbert on a journey that spans the course of history, from Eden to Mount Hermon, from Hermon to Babel, from Babel to Rome, from Rome to the cross, and from there to us. Biblical prophecy is coming true before your eyes, and to understand it, you must discern the times both then and now. It's time to unravel the threads of this all-encompassing prophetic paradox. It's time to unravel Revelation. Welcome to Unraveling Revelation from Skywatch TV. This is a special exclusive interview as we want to dive deeper into a topic that Sharon and I have been talking about on the program. We've been dealing with the seals, Revelation 6, seals 1 through 6. And when we got to seal number 6, we realized we needed to dig a little deeper. And we mentioned a book that we found very influential. The book was published back around 2005. Earthquake Resurrection is the title of the book. Joining us via Skype, where we are maintaining social distance of several hundred miles, a gentleman we've been honored to call our friends for the last 15 years, and the author of Earthquake Resurrection, as well as a couple of other books we'll touch on before the end of this interview. We welcome David W. Lowe to the program. David, it's good to see you again.
Great to see you too, Derek. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to talking about some interesting topics here.
This is something that I think caught a lot of people by surprise when Sharon and I brought this up on Unraveling Revelation, because this is really a different way of viewing not just the timing of the seals perhaps in the overall timeline of the end times, but what might be behind some of the natural events that have been prophesied by John for the sixth seal. Just in a nutshell, and then we'll start drilling down into the book. What is the overall thesis of Earthquake Resurrection?
I'll tell you, the reason that I set out to write the book initially was I felt there was always a lot of focus on the rapture, the catching up of the saints, but not a lot of focus on the resurrection of the dead, which precedes the catching up or the rapture, and will involve arguably many, many more people than the ones that are alive at the time of Jesus' return. And so I had always grown up under the pre-tribulation rapture ideas and followed that, and that was my understanding of it. And when I started to read and put some things together on my own, certain things just didn't make sense. And then I started to discover some things about the resurrection. And when I talk about a resurrection, I mean into an immortal body versus a normal resurrection, into a mortal body such as Lazarus. We're talking about back into an immortal body that Jesus experienced, and a couple others that we'll talk about. Mm-hmm. I found an interesting connection, which was a shaking of the earth.
So the natural consequences, the earthquake that accompanies the opening of the sixth seal, you then are saying that that's connected to the resurrection event of some past resurrection events, but also future resurrection event that we see. So in a nutshell then, something happens when a human body is resurrected into an incorruptible form, an immortal body that causes this shaking of the earth.
Yes. When you dig into the account of Jesus' resurrection in Matthew chapter 27, you won't find this in the other Gospels. What you will find is the earth shook, the rocks split apart, and tombs were open, and the bodies of many saints that were dead came to life and began to walk the streets of Jerusalem. And there's a little phrase there that's key, that it says they came to life after his resurrection, mm-hmm. and were seen by many people. What Matthew appears to be doing is giving us some additional detail about the moment of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Not only was Jesus raised and causing a shaking of the earth, but also many saints who had died also came to life. So there was so much power in the resurrection of the dead to an immortal body that at that moment, Jesus was raised, and the many saints were also raised and came to life. So there's another example in the book of Revelation, if you skip up over to chapter 11, where the two witnesses are in the city of Jerusalem. And the scripture says that they are put to death, and 3.5 days later, they miraculously come to life and are caught up into the air. And as they are brought to life, there is a great earthquake in the city that causes actually 7,000 people to die. If you put all those together, you have three examples: Jesus, the many saints, and the two witnesses, where we have a shaking of the earth associated with a resurrection into an immortal body.
And I should point out, and I did a little research on history of earthquakes in that part of the world for the presentation I put together for the True Legends Conference, and 7,000 in Jerusalem at one shot would be a massive earthquake. But presumably then, but you're talking about two bodies being resurrected at the same time compared to just the one in the days of Jesus. The saints who appeared from the tombs, I think we should clarify, who emerged from the tombs, they were more like Lazarus, correct? Where they were resurrected and then died again, or do we have any indication, any evidence?
We do not have any indication or any evidence about that, but I think the evidence is that there's probably a good chance that those many saints were from many years past. And I actually go into my book, Earthquake Resurrection, with the possibility that those many saints could be the 144,000 that are mentioned in Revelations chapter 7 and 14.
Oh, yes.
I dedicate an entire chapter to that. So.
That is quite interesting. And you're right, the Bible doesn't tell us, but you did make the point, because when reading Matthew 27, some might conclude, and it's verse 52, by the way, if you're following along at home, we might assume, since the account of the saints leaving the tombs is in Matthew 27, and then the earthquake and the women finding the empty tomb follows, that they were raised first. But you point out that in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul calls Jesus the first fruits of the resurrection. So that's not, they came out after his resurrection.
They did, yep. And it says that in chapter 27. Right. They came to life after his resurrection and were seen by many. And one thing that's interesting, the way that Matthew writes, he doesn't always write in a chronological fashion. For example, that's a good example. And the discourse in Matthew chapter 24, if you compare to the book of Luke, for example, you'll find things in Matthew chapter 24 that Luke has in chapter 17 and chapter 21 in two different settings, two different cities, actually. He's not always writing in a chronological fashion, and so that's one example where he's kind of inserting like a parenthetical explanation about the resurrection moment before it even is recorded in 28.
Now, the energy required to literally shake the earth is pretty intense. And you spend some time addressing that, but you also do that in the context of the Shroud of Turin. Why did you bring the Shroud of Turin into your book?
Well, the speculation is that is a actual photograph of the moment of the resurrection, because the power that was required to raise Jesus from the dead, and the shroud has all of the evidence and the marks of a man who was crucified and had blood on the piece of cloth, both front and back. So many scientists obviously have looked at this over many years, and as technology has increased, they've been able to make more and more incredible discoveries about this thing, that it has 3D qualities, and that There's no way the image could have been made, faked or painted or anything like that. It really is concluded that it's a supernatural phenomenon, and so that shroud is really evidence of the powerful nature of the resurrection moment. Just more proof of what the apostles wrote about in the New Testament, that there was the power of his resurrection, and so that was on display, and I think recorded on the shroud. Now, the shroud is very controversial. It's not something that we should worship, and it's not required for us to believe that Jesus rose from the dead at all. That's by faith. But I believe it's a very interesting piece of history.
Yeah, and we've been blessed to have the opportunity, Sharon and me, to interview some of the scientists who've actually examined the shroud up close, Barry Schwartz and Russ Bealt, among others. In particular, Barry Schwartz, who was raised as an Orthodox Jew and then rejected faith altogether, lived as an agnostic, atheist, until he came in contact with the shroud, and has concluded through his own investigation that it is legitimate. So we've got some physical evidence there that suggests that something happened at the moment of resurrection that emitted a great deal of energy. We've got the eyewitness testimony of Matthew, who also said there were additional eyewitnesses. This is interesting. They appeared to many, Matthew 27:53. So you've got people reading the Gospels later. It's like, okay, maybe we go to Jerusalem, we can ask around and find some eyewitnesses, which is not the case with many other religious faiths. And interestingly, recently geologists working in the Dead Sea area at En-Gedi, which is on the west side of the Dead Sea, west shore of the Dead Sea, basically. It's where David cut the hem off of Saul's robe. They found, through taking core samples of the rock, that they were able to pinpoint an earthquake to about the year 31 AD in the region of the Dead Sea, which would have shaken Jerusalem, plus or minus 5 years. So that's right in the wheelhouse of what you're writing about in Earthquake Resurrection.
Absolutely.
One of the other things, yeah. So I mean, we've got now. Of course, they didn't connect it to the gospel account. I think the way they phrased it as scientists was clearly Matthew drew on this event to illustrate the account of the power of the resurrection of Jesus. Like, okay, have it your way. We'll interpret the data the way, through a biblical lens. Now, about the time you published the book, and you make reference to this event in the book, and in fact, on a recent Unraveling Revelation broadcast, I included video clips from a couple of recent major earthquakes. The 2011 earthquake off the coast of Japan that caused the Fukushima meltdown at the Daiichi Fukushima nuclear plant, but also the Boxing Day 2004 earthquake in the Indian Ocean. And you realize when you look at the after effects of those quakes, how much power we must be talking about here to move the earth in ways that are way beyond what happened in those. I mean, because we know that in the Indian Ocean quake, I've forgotten what the death toll is, but it was in the hundreds of thousands. And the earth literally moved, the rotational axis shifted by, I think, about an inch. And the length of the day was shortened by some microseconds, like 1.6 microseconds or something. But that was a magnitude 9.2 quake, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And what we're looking at here in the way these are described in the book of Revelation, we're looking at something that's far more powerful than that.
I go into quite a bit of detail about the tsunami of 2004 in both of my books. Then His Voice Shook the Earth and Earthquake Resurrection. If you think about all of the bodies of Christians, buried all over the globe, it's like a localized earthquake caused that much damage. But what will happen when, in the blink of an eye, in the future, all of the dead are raised in one single moment? Mm-hmm. And there's the power of the resurrection that we see evidenced in Scripture with Jesus and the many saints and the two witnesses. it just follows logically that there will be a destructive event. There's even more evidence about this. If you look at the First Thessalonians account of the mystery that Paul revealed about the catching up event, he said the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God. The dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. A few verses later, the next chapter says, don't let this event catch you as a thief, breaking into your home, because there will be sudden destruction that comes upon those that are on the earth. So right after talking about the event, he says it will be a sudden destructive event that they will not be able to escape. Then there's also the connection of Luke chapter 17 and Matthew 24, where Jesus is asked about his return, and he compares it to lightning flashing in the sky from east to west is how his coming is going to be. So we think that is very similar to the blinking of an eye that Paul revealed. And then, interestingly, Jesus goes on to cite two examples right after that lightning flash event of what it's going to be like. What were the two examples? The two examples were the days of Noah and the days of Lot. The flood, a destructive event of the earth, obviously. And then the raining of fire down on Sodom and Gomorrah, an obviously destructive event. He said people were carrying on life as normal right up until the moment of those events, and then a sudden destructive event came and destroyed them all. It will be the same in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. So those two examples, Paul's explanation of sudden destruction, then you can see how the power of the resurrection, the voice of the trumpet blowing, the last trump, the trumpet of God, could fit perfectly with the events of the sixth seal, which talks about a great earthquake, a violent moving of islands and mountains and things like that. And then in Revelation chapter 7, we are shown an enormous crowd of people before the throne. That is the perfect place for the raptured living people to be before the throne right after the sixth seal resurrection of the dead and catching up.
So if we equate the resurrection of the faithful with the opening of the sixth seal, does that mean the opening of the sixth seal is when the church is raptured from the earth? Our interview with David W. Lowe, the author of Earthquake Resurrection, continues on Unraveling Revelation next.
The Book of Enoch is one of the most influential and historically relevant books in history. And now, for the first time, you'll be able to comprehend the book's content with greater insight and clarity than ever before. Skywatch TV is proud to announce the companion to the Book of Enoch Special Collection. When you order the brand new companion to the Book of Enoch Reader's Commentary Volume 1 by Dr. Michael S. Heiser, you'll also receive his best-selling book, Reversing Hermon. Plus, you'll also receive on DVD the Book of Enoch, Fallen Angels, and Ancient Aliens, an exclusive production with Dr. Michael Heiser regarding the blatant lies of ancient astronaut theory and the horrifying nature of fallen angels and alien abduction. But that's not all. You'll also receive the beautifully printed hardback edition of the original historical Book of Enoch from Defender Publishing, perfect for assisting serious researchers and students in the study of the Bible and the early age. Sold separately, this special collection retails for $120. Yours now for only $35 plus shipping and handling. So whether you've read the Book of Enoch before or perhaps want to journey through it for the first time ever, without a doubt you'll find this resource enormously enlightening. So don't delay. Order the companion to the Book of Enoch Special Collection now. Available at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985.
Welcome back to Unraveling Revelation from Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. Our special interview with David W. Lowe, author of Earthquake Resurrection, continues. But we move to then this timing of this resurrection. And you also use the word rapture event. So I guess first things first, are we then equating the resurrection that Paul writes about in 1 Corinthians 15, that we see in 1 Thessalonians 4, with the rapture?
Yes, because both of those scriptures include both the resurrection and the catching up event.
Okay,
so
right. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. The dead will be raised first, and then we who are alive will be caught up in the air. Okay.
Yes.
And then the evidence being in Revelation 7, that's when we suddenly see this vast multitude in front of the throne. Yes.
A great, enormous crowd of people, nations, kindred, tongues, that it's just the perfect place in the chronology of that sixth seal event, and before the opening of the seventh seal, where the day of the Lord's wrath begins to be poured out in the form of the trumpets and the bowl judgments. Those people being up in heaven, and he said, it's said that God will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and they will no longer, experience the pain of the great tribulation that they had gone through on earth, or the great affliction or suffering.
The other thing that I want to touch on and I want to dig into, because this is one of the things that Sharon and I have been discussing as we looked at the identities of the riders who went forth at the opening of the seals. And we'll set aside the identity of the riders for a moment to look at the timing here. So we're setting the rapture of the church at the opening of the sixth seal, which some people may find surprising, as I think a lot of us who were raised with and I had very little teaching, raised in very liturgical denominations that didn't touch the book of Revelation with a 10-foot pole. But when I began to read into it, credit my dad for this. He bought Late Great Planet Earth back in the day. And God bless Hal Lindsey for getting people excited about end times prophecy. We kind of take as a given that the seals aren't opened until after the rapture. Where do you place the openings of the seals in terms of a timeline?
I place the openings of the seals in the first century.
Okay, as do we.
And so how do you get there? You really have to go back to the beginning of Revelation chapter 4 and 5. If you look closely at that, John is given a vision of the hereafter, or things that must happen afterward. And so in order to be shown the things that will happen after, he's given a vision of what I believe is the heavenly perspective of the ascension to the right hand of God. And so what clues do we have? Why would I think that? What clues do we have? Well, first of all, we have John being shown a vision of the throne room, where there are 24 elders and 4 living creatures surrounding a throne, and there's one seated on the throne. And there's a very important clue that is in the first verse of Revelation chapter 5, and that is that there is a 7-sealed scroll or book, and it is at the right hand of God, the right hand of the one seated on the throne. Okay? When you look at the New Testament, the Gospels, and also the epistles, over and over we are told that Jesus is seated at the right hand of God. He is making intercession for us at the right hand of God. Angels and authorities and powers are made subject to him as he is seated there. He's waiting for his enemies to be made his footstool. He's sitting there at the right hand of God. What I believe we're being shown here, and what John was shown in this vision, is there was a specific purpose for Jesus to sit down at the right hand of God. Here we have in God's right hand the 7-sealed scroll of history, the 7-sealed scroll of the progression from his ascension in the first century to the opening of the 6th seal and the consummation of the ages, the judgment of the earth that we see all throughout the rest of the book of Revelation. So it's a really important concept. So there's a call made through heaven, because John begins weeping, and he says there's no one who is found worthy to open the scroll. So I began thinking about that, and I was like, I've always been taught under the traditional pre-tribulation teaching that this is a vision John's being shown of a future event after the rapture of the church has already happened. And if that's the case, why isn't Jesus there? Why isn't he already sitting on the throne at God's right hand?
Mm-hmm.
If this is to be 2,000 plus years in the future, why was there a call made for him and for someone to open the scroll? He should have been there to open it already. He has already ascended. He has already sat down at the right hand of God. So that led me to the understanding that perhaps John is being shown a vision of the first century ascension from a heavenly perspective. You know, we're given the earthly perspective in Acts chapter 1, where he was caught up on the Mount of Olives and a cloud received him up into heaven. This, I believe, is the heavenly perspective of when he arrived.
Yeah.
Here the Lamb appears in the middle of the throne room, in the midst of the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders. And the first thing that he does is move to the right hand of God and take that scroll. Then we have an unfortunate chapter break, which a lot of people put thousands and thousands of years in between that and say, okay, the opening of the first seal is something that hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
But it really makes more sense to understand that he took the scroll at that time and then began to open the first 5 seals. And it was really showing John, here's the things that are going to happen hereafter. Here is the progression of history. Here's what happened in the spiritual realm, where 4 spirits on the 4 horses began doing certain things and were given power, were given authority to make people do certain things on the earth. And that's what I believe happened. Was John was shown something that began to happen in the first century and would happen concurrently all the way into the present. So in effect, we are still seeing what is happening with the opening of the first 4 seals today.
To find out more about David W. Lowe and his book, Earthquake Resurrection, visit his website, earthquakeresurrection.com. Now, if, as David believes, and Sharon and I agree, the first 5 seals of the 7-sealed scroll in Revelation 6 have already been opened, that begs the question, who does David think the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are? We'll explore that as our conversation with David W. Lowe, author of Earthquake Resurrection, continues next time. Until then, thank you for watching. For Sharon K. Gilbert, I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is Unraveling Revelation from Skywatch TV.